from the last video of just why do we need these buttons or switches, you feel a little bit of a motivation or understanding as to why you'd want to learn them. Again, our goal is if we have a situation where we want to be able to press a key, for example, and not have to hold it down, and the action that's triggered by that key press stays. So it could be that it switched to a color, and I don't have to hold it down to stay that color, or that it triggered a movement like a bouncing ball or a person running. All right, so to do this, we need to introduce a new variable type, and is a variable Boolean. Now you've already heard about Boolean because that's what is in the parentheses when we have our if statement. We have if, and then what's in parentheses, that's the Boolean. And remember, a Boolean is something that's true or false. So we can make our own Booleans, and that's going to be as a variable. So it's called, or we initialize it as a Boolean type, just like we had with our other variables. So some are ints for integers, some are floats if it's going to be decimals, and this is Boolean. You can call it whatever you want. If you want, you can call it Bob's Hot Dog Stand, but I'm probably going to call mine like button, button 1, button 2, button 3, very original names. We have it equal, not a number, but true or false, and I'll explain which one you want to choose. How do you decide if your variable should equal true or false? Well, we're going to have two statements, and in our first statement, it's going to be the code that we want if it is true. And in our second statement, it's going to be the code that we want that it's false. So it's simply, do you want it to look like the true code or the code that's in the false statement when it opens up? It'll make more sense once you actually get some code on. By the way, at this stage, you should just be like watching the video, following along with your own PowerPoint. And then when we get to some code, pause it, type in the code, and then come back. So our step one is we're going to make our Boolean, and we're going to declare it as either true or false. So how exactly do we decide if it's true or false? You're going to write your if Boolean condition, and this is what's going to be considered true. And you're going to have a new statement, which is an else statement. And else is like everything else that wasn't in here. So if this is true, it's going to run this code. If this is not true, so in other words, all else, it's going to run this code. So this is kind of like a false. You could think of that in your mind as a false. If the Boolean is true, we get this. Everything else is false. Notice the syntax for an else. It's a lot simpler than the other ones. It doesn't take any arguments. It's just else, open curly bracket, put in your code, and closing curly bracket. So let's see this with some actual code in it. Here's our step one. Up at the top, above my setup, I have a Boolean. I've called it button. Very original name, I know. And I'm having it equal true. In my draw, I have a rectangle, and I just put it in the middle. And I wrote if button, and then I have a red fill. So if button is my true state. This is what I'll get if my variable is in the true state. When I write this, this is the same as writing if button equals true, but I don't have to write all that out. If button is understood by processing to mean if button is true. Then I'm going to close that out and write else and give it a different fill. And this is my false statement. So if I set my Boolean button to equal false, I would see this first. Okay? Nothing's going to work yet, but we should still get this code. So I'm going to copy the code over into a new processing sketch. I press play, and I get the red one. I don't have anything yet to trigger into the false, so that's why I can't get the green one. But the reason I get the red one is because I set my button to true, and the information that's in this if statement is what's true. So if I switch my button to false, what do you think I'm going to get when I open it up? I'm going to get the green rectangle because the else has the code for the false. I'll just put that back though. So the second part of this is that we need something that's going to trigger these true and false events. So for example, I could use a key press. Here I'm saying if the key is pressed, then button equals true. So if I press a key, it jumps to this code. Else, which is the same as saying like false, if the key is not pressed, button equals false. And so it would give me this. So I'm going to copy this code over. It's still not quite done, but it'll sort of work right now. So now if key is pressed, give it true. So now I'm starting out, and let's see, I have started with my green one, and I go to, if I press a key, it triggers it to become true, so I get my red, and if the key is not pressed, I'm in the false state. So it's going to give me the green one. Okay, so take a second and just kind of like look over this code and absorb that for a minute. Okay, again, when it starts out, my key is not pressed, so that's why it's giving me what's in the false state. When I press the key, it makes my button true and it gives me the color that's in the true state. But it's one key that is switching back and forth. So I don't have to use two keys to do this, but it's not quite what I want yet, because what I want is I press red and I can let go of, I press A and I can let go of A and it stays red. Right now when I let go of A, it switches back. So we have a little bit more work to do. The toggle, and now don't bother to write this code in, but let's talk about it. What we need to do is create a toggle. So we're basically saying if the key is pressed, the button equals true, else the button equals false. If we were fully writing it out, we would use that, but there's a shortcut, and here's that haiku. And this is just weird to understand. It's just like a haiku, but just maybe this is one of those coding situations where you want to just accept it and memorize it, and then I don't know how much sense it makes. But what we write here is button equals not button. And that's our haiku. So button equals not button. That's a toggle. So we're saying if button equals not button is like if going back and forth between true and false. Where are we going to put this in? In its own code block of void key press. So the stuff actually that I just had you add to your code, we are going to take that out. We're not going to use this key press anymore. This didn't work for us. Part of the reason it didn't work for us, I mean, it kind of worked, but I still had to hold the key down, was because it's in the draw. So it just keeps cycling through and it won't just simply stay. I want to take advantage of the code block void key press because that only fires once. So when I click it, it's going to stay true. And when I click it, it's going to go back to false. So I'm taking all of this stuff out. So actually what's in my code of the draw is just what I get if my button is true and what I get if my button's false. The trigger is going to be the void key press. The toggle that makes it go back and forth between true and false is the button equals not button. That's going to be in my void key press. Make sure I'm at the bottom of my draw. And let's check this out now. So now it starts out as red because I have my button set to true. I hit A. I didn't specify a key yet. I should do that. And I don't have to hold A down. It switches to the false. And I hit A and it switches back to the true. Okay? Let's just see if I switch this to false. It starts out now as green. It jumps to my green one, so it gives me what's in my false condition. And this has no problem. This can go back and forth. So it's like saying if I'm now at not button, so I'm like in the false, but then I can also equal true. If I hit a key, then it switches to true, and it just goes back and forth. And the last thing would be like if you want to specify a key to have that happen. All right, take a minute and pause. Go through this, just like look at the code, write down any questions, and then we'll continue on with the next video.